Every generation picks one marriage and puts it on trial. Ours went with two law students who met at Yale, moved to Arkansas, and then spent 3 decades getting audited by a country that never once got invited past the porch. The evidence arrived on a Schedule 2, a tabloid story in 1992, a civil lawsuit in 1994, and then a 1998 investigation that ended with the House of Representatives voting on whether to throw a sitting president out of his own building. Underneath all of it ran one question, usually asked with more venom than curiosity. Why didn't she leave? That question comes preloaded, which is exactly what makes it fun for everybody except the two people living inside it. Ask it in a bar, and you'll have an answer in 4 seconds, delivered with total confidence by somebody whose evidentiary base consists of headlines glimpsed while the game played on the other screen. Power, they'll tell you, or ambition, or a contract with a signature line where the love should be. Maybe. The people who study this for a living, and there are a lot of them, have landed on at least 4 separate explanations, and those 4 explanations agree about nothing except the dates. This script sticks to what can be proved, what Hillary Clinton has actually put in writing, and what the historians have argued in the gap between those two things. I'll flag where the ground goes soft, because no subject in modern American politics attracts more confident nonsense per square inch than this one. Everybody got a piece of the ending. Kenneth Starr got the president under oath, the House got its vote, the picture desks got a photograph on a beach, and the rest of us got 25 years of speculation about the inside of a woman's head. Nobody got the room. That's the actual story here. The most surveilled marriage of the 20th century, and the decision sitting at the middle of it never once came out from behind a closed door. Start with the part that gets skipped, mostly because it flatters neither caricature. Carl Bernstein, who burned years and more than 200 interviews on a woman in charge, traces the entire thing back to Yale Law School and a young woman out of the Midwest who showed up armed with discipline, a frightening intellect, and a moral seriousness that could strip paint off a bumper. Bill Clinton came at her from the opposite direction, all charm and appetite, a man who could talk his way into a room and then talk the room into whatever he wanted. Bernstein's reading is that the kid from Arkansas melted her Puritanism and matched her brain, and that everything ugly which came later grew out of a bond that began as something real rather than something arranged. 3 decades on, writing after the worst of it, Clinton reached back past all the wreckage and landed on exactly that. In Living History, she points to a conversation her husband started in the spring of 1971 that 30-odd years later still hadn't run out of material, and she credits him with understanding her better than anyone alive, and with making her laugh in a way nobody else has managed. Read that cold and it lands like a greeting card. Read it as the closing argument of a trial lawyer explaining the most criticized decision of her life, though, and it turns into something with teeth, because the claim buried in there is that the working currency of this marriage was talk. Bernstein's larger argument gets laughed out of green rooms faster than any other in the literature, which is roughly what you'd expect. He thinks the political world habitually underestimates the private reality of long marriages. 25 years of shared work, a daughter, a mountain of accumulated history that nobody outside the house can inventory. Under that reading, she stayed because she loved him, forgave him, and refused to torch a family she'd spent 3 decades building, an explanation so ordinary that professional cynics find it insulting. Ordinary explanations aren't wrong just because they're boring. Plenty of marriages run on exactly that arithmetic, minus the subpoenas, and every competing theory you're about to hear has to either explain this one or explain it away. January 1992, and the Star ran a story that should have ended him. Jennifer Flowers, an Arkansas state employee, claimed a 12-year affair with the sitting governor of Arkansas, who happened at that moment to be chasing the Democratic nomination for President of the United States. Primary campaigns die of this. What the Clintons chose instead of hiding was to put the marriage on television inside the largest audience window of the American calendar. Sunday, January 26th. Super Bowl 26 wound down, the country stayed on the channel, and CBS handed the couple a couch, a camera, and 60 minutes. Bill Clinton conceded on air that he'd caused pain inside his marriage, which in 1992 passed for radical candor. Then his wife, who until that evening had operated mostly as a footnote in national coverage, delivered the sentence that would trail her for the rest of her public life. She refused, on national television, to be some little woman standing by my man, and she pulled Tammy Wynette into it to make the point land. What came next skipped the wronged wife script entirely. She sat on that couch because she loved him, because she respected him, because she honored what the two of them had come through together. Historians generally credit that broadcast with saving his candidacy. Sit with that a second, because it bends the shape of everything after it. The marriage didn't merely survive the 1992 primaries. The marriage rescued them, and both people on that couch understood precisely what had just happened. Something else happened in those minutes, and nobody named it for years. The woman America met that night wasn't a candidate's wife in the traditional sense. She was co-counsel, and she had just argued the case herself in front of the largest jury available in American life. Every later fight over what she is, the ambition, the calculation, the coldness that columnists kept detecting at 40 paces, runs back through that one broadcast. She saved him in public. Everyone watching filed that away, including, I'd guess, her. There's the trap nobody mentions when they demand to know why she didn't walk. Once a marriage becomes load-bearing for a national campaign, walking out stops being a private act and becomes a demolition, with a body count attached. Staff, donors, a party apparatus, a policy agenda, a kid. None of that proves she stayed for political reasons, and I want to be clear about that, because the cynical version of this story loves to skip a step. What it does mean is that the decision never got to be simple again, and simplicity is exactly what the Barstool version always assumes. May 6th, 1994. Paula Jones, another former Arkansas state employee, filed a civil sexual harassment suit against the sitting president, and the coverage treated the whole business as a legal headache, rather than a marital one. Legally, that filing worked like a can opener. The Jones case built the procedural machinery that later allowed independent counsel Kenneth Starr to put the President of the United States under subpoena and question him about his private sexual behavior, an inquiry no White House had ever been engineered to withstand. Understand what changed between 1992 and 1994, because the difference decides everything after it. A tabloid story can be denied, spun, outshouted, or survived by sitting on a couch beside your wife and looking sincere on a Sunday night. A federal subpoena doesn't care how sincere anybody looks. Once the Jones litigation handed a prosecutor a lawful route into the president's private conduct, the crisis playbook that had worked so beautifully in January 1992 turned into scrap. You cannot charm a grand jury. The single instrument that rescued him the first time, a marriage performed live on national television, would be worth nothing whatsoever in a room where sworn testimony is the only currency accepted. Nobody reading the docket in 1994 saw the end of the world coming. That's generally how the end of the world shows up, though, filed in triplicate, assigned a case number, and ignored by everyone who should have been paying attention. John Harris eventually titled his book about those years, The Survivor, which tells you how the whole presidency ended up getting filed. Mid-January 1998, and it broke first on the Drudge Report and then in the Washington Post. The president under investigation over an alleged sexual relationship with a 22-year-old White House intern, along with the possibility that he had pushed somebody to lie under oath. Monica Lewinsky's name entered the American language inside a week. For the 7 months that followed, Bill Clinton denied all of it, and he denied it to the public, to his own cabinet, and to his wife. 7 months. That number does more work in this story than any other figure in it. On January 27th, with the thing still detonating, Hillary Clinton went on NBC's Today Show and pinned the scandal on a vast right-wing conspiracy built to destroy her husband's presidency. The phrase lodged itself in the political vocabulary and has never come out. She spoke that morning as a wife defending a man who had looked her in the face and lied. And she spoke as the most effective surrogate the White House had in the building. And nobody alive could separate those two roles in real time, possibly including her. Whether she believed him remains the most violently contested question in the entire literature. One camp reads her as a woman deceived by a virtuoso liar, which is the reading her own memoir supports. Another camp reads her as a professional operator who understood the exact dimensions of the man she married and picked the defense most likely to keep the presidency breathing. Her biographers have been swinging at each other over this for a quarter century without landing a decisive blow, and they never will, because the evidence that would settle it consists entirely of two people's memories of private conversations, and one of those two has a documented history of lying about this precise subject. The Diane Blair archive deserves a minute here, since it's close to the only material in this story written by somebody with nothing to sell. Blair, Clinton's closest confidant, kept a contemporaneous private diary, and the historians working from it, Bernstein most of all, come away describing a woman in real shock and real grief through 1998 rather than a strategist running a play. Not proof. Notes taken by a friend at the time carry a different kind of weight than a memoir published years later by a woman with a career to protect. And in a story sealed this tightly, that gap decides more arguments than anything else on the shelf. Notice that both readings produce identical public behavior. That's the whole problem with reasoning backward from a television appearance into the interior of a marriage, and it's why the confident takes on either side deserve a raised eyebrow and a follow-up question. She went on that program in January 1998 and defended him in front of the country. What she knew while she was doing it stayed in the room. By her own account, the worst morning of the marriage arrived on August 15, 1998, 2 days before he was due in front of a federal grand jury. Bill Clinton told his wife that the affair had happened. Everything she had spent 7 months defending in public collapsed inside a single conversation, and the collapse came with a clock attached, because a federal grand jury does not reschedule for anybody's marriage. On August 17th, he testified, and that night he went on national television and admitted to a relationship he described as inappropriate. The country received the confession as a broadcast. His wife had received it 2 mornings earlier in private, roughly 48 hours before a federal prosecutor would have pulled it out of him under oath regardless. Whether conscience or the grand jury calendar produced that timing is not a thing anybody can document. What can be documented is that the most private conversation of a 30-year marriage got scheduled by a court. In Living History, she describes herself as dumbfounded, heartbroken, and outraged that she'd believed him at all. Run that sequence in order, and the arithmetic of the humiliation comes clear. Not just the betrayal, but the 7 months of her own credibility spent covering it, on camera, under her own name, in front of everyone she had ever asked to trust her. Then came the photograph. Martha's Vineyard, the family out walking, Chelsea Clinton between her parents and serving as the buffer they couldn't be for each other, and every picture desk in America running it because the image told the story without needing a line of copy. Whatever happened inside that house stayed inside that house. The public got the walk, and the public has been interpreting the walk ever since. Somewhere in the weeks that followed, with the House assembling articles of impeachment and her husband's presidency hanging on a vote count, Hillary Clinton decided not to file for divorce. No document explaining that choice has ever surfaced. What the historians do agree on is the consequence. Her refusal to leave preserved the moral and political capital he needed to survive removal from office. Take that away in the autumn of 1998, and the arithmetic in the Senate starts looking very different. The frame that gets skipped in nearly every cable segment ever aired about this marriage gets skipped for an unglamorous reason. Political reporters own no working vocabulary for religion. Hillary Clinton is a Methodist, and not the Christmas and Easter kind. Bernstein and others treat her United Methodism as one of the fixed points of her adult life, a tradition that leans hard on grace, on forgiveness, and on the covenant sitting underneath a marriage, rather than the feelings floating on top of it. Grace is the word doing the heavy work there, and it translates into politics about, as well as Latin translates into a bar fight. Under that theology, forgiveness isn't a prize the wrong party awards. Once the offender has earned it back, it's an obligation running in one direction, whether he deserves the thing or not. A marriage inside that framework isn't a partnership you exit when the returns go negative. It's a covenant, and covenants are built specifically to survive the people inside them behaving badly. Nothing sentimental about it. The demand falls hardest on whoever got hurt, which is either beautiful or monstrous, depending on the morning you ask. During the 1998 crisis, she went to her clergy. She consulted regularly with religious figures, including Reverend Bill Shillity and Reverend J. Philip Wagaman, an utterly ordinary thing for a believer in agony to do, and a completely illegible one to a press corps that can diagram a whip count in its sleep. Inside that framework, staying isn't weakness, and it isn't strategy. Inside that framework, staying is an obligation, taken on in front of God, and walking out on a repentant spouse means walking out on the possibility of redemption itself, which for a serious Methodist is not a small ask. Now the honest caveat, because I promised one, this frame rests on second-hand reporting rather than documentation. Her pastoral counseling sits sealed behind clerical confidentiality, and faith makes lousy courtroom evidence precisely because you can't falsify it. What can be said is narrower and still worth saying. A woman with those beliefs, in that much pain, went looking for her ministers instead of her divorce attorney. And she did it in the same weeks the House was drafting articles against her husband. All right, the cynical read, and it deserves a fair hearing because serious reporters assembled it out of insider accounts rather than spite. Jeff Girth and Don Van Natta Jr., in her way, describe something closer to a corporation with two principals than a household, a co-presidency operating out of a residence. The argument holds that the Clintons' ambitions had fused into a single object years before 1998. He needed her discipline and her strategic mind to reach the White House at all, and she needed his once-in-a-generation political talent to move the policy she cared about and eventually to launch a career of her own. Under that reading, divorce in 1998 doesn't look like liberation. Divorce looks like liquidating a 25-year joint venture at the absolute bottom of the market and handing the Democratic Party to somebody else on the way out the door. Sally Bedell Smith's For Love of Politics runs colder still. And for my money, it's the more useful book. She spends her pages on how the West Wing actually operated, who sat in which meeting, whose priorities survived contact with whose staff, and she argues that a shared obsession with policy and power functioned as the connective tissue that let the marriage outlast its interpersonal failures. Two people who agreed completely about the work and disagreed about everything the work didn't cover. Under Smith's reading, the affairs damaged something real. They simply didn't damage the thing the marriage actually ran on. It's a clean theory, and I understand why people love it. The sourcing thins out badly, right where the theory gets juiciest, though, and the researchers themselves filed the claim about her 1998 strategic calculation under speculation rather than documented fact. The frame explains her behavior without ever needing to know what she felt, which is simultaneously its great strength and its cheat. Two people, one filing cabinet, a shared resume, and no interior life required. Convenient as hell for a columnist on Deadline. By 1999, she had become a Rorschach test with a Secret Service detail, and nowhere did that show up more brutally than among the feminist academics and critics who had spent years arguing about what her career meant. One line of criticism reads her decision as a betrayal. Under that view, she subordinated her own dignity to her husband's survival and functioned as an enabler of his misconduct, with the sharpest version of the accusation holding that her staff was permitted to smear the women who accused him. That charge sits in the record, and I'm not going to soften it, because the counter-argument is strong enough to survive hearing it. The counter-argument runs like this, refusing to be driven out of her own marriage and her own public life. By her husband's political enemies was itself an act of agency, and she converted the position of a grieved spouse into the political capital that won her a United States Senate seat in 2000. Not a woman waiting to be rescued, a woman who took the worst year of her life and turned it into a constituency. That Senate seat is where the argument grows. Teeth. Less than 2 years after the acquittal, the wronged wife of the impeachment coverage held office in her own name, with her own mandate, answerable to nobody's marriage. Read that as vindication, or read it as the payoff on a decision made in the autumn of 1998, and then notice that the record supports neither reading conclusively because no document has ever surfaced showing what she was calculating that autumn. The outcome is on paper. The intention behind it isn't, and the confidence with which people describe her intentions has always outrun the available evidence by a country mile. Two groups of intelligent women working from identical evidence, arriving at opposite verdicts, and the reason isn't sloppiness on either side. The reason is that the double bind is real and it has no exit. Leave, and you're the wife who couldn't hold it together, reduced to the thing that happened to you. Stay, and you're an accomplice. The coverage of 1998 offered no third door, and honestly, neither does most of the coverage today. Worth saying out loud before we go any further, not one of these frames excludes the others. A woman can love her husband, believe her church obligates her to forgive him, understand exactly what a divorce cost the project she spent 25 years assembling, and resent every columnist on earth for telling her which of those motives she's permitted to have. Human beings don't run on one variable. Biographers write in frames because a book needs a thesis, and a thesis needs an enemy, and the war over which frame wins has probably done more to bury this marriage than to explain it. Set Carl Bernstein next to Gail Sheehy, and you get the entire fight compressed onto 2 book jackets. Bernstein you've already met. Sheehy's Hillary's Choice, published in 1999 while the wreckage still smoked, takes the route he refuses. Psychobiography, the diagnosis of a stranger. Her thesis reaches back to a strict, disciplinarian father and a childhood short on affection, and argues that Clinton grew psychologically addicted to a cycle of emotional injury and redemption with her husband. The Hillary who walks out of that book blinded herself to fatal flaws in the man to feed her own ambition by proxy, choosing, in Sheehy's phrase, not to know what she knew. Academic reviewers and historians have spent years hammering that approach as reductive and built on speculative psychoanalysis, rather than anything a fact-checker could touch. Diagnosing a woman you have never treated using a childhood you reconstructed out of other people's memories is a hell of a methodology. Sheehy's version lost the argument in the journals and won it absolutely, everywhere else, which is the part worth sitting with, because the theory, with no documentary support underneath it, is the one that made it into the bloodstream and stayed there. October 2019. Hillary Clinton sat down with Good Morning America to promote a book about courageous women, and somebody asked her to name the gutsiest thing she had ever done herself. She had a deep bench to choose from. A Senate seat pulled out of the wreckage in 2000, 3 memoirs, an entire public career rebuilt after a humiliation broadcast into every house in the country. She named staying in her marriage, and she used that word specifically, gutsy, which is a strange word to pick if you're describing something that merely happened to you. Take the choice of word seriously, because it's the one moment in this whole story where she tells you flat out how she filed the decision in her own head. Calling it gutsy inverts the entire national assumption. The country had spent 27 years treating what she did as passivity, as weakness, as the thing that occurred, while the interesting men did things. She's telling you it demanded more from her than leaving would have, and in What Happened, she lays out the actual test she applied on the days she wasn't sure the marriage should survive at all. Did she still love him? And could she stay in it without turning into someone she wouldn't recognize, warped by anger or resentment or distance? The answer to both, every time she ran it, came back yes. She's given us 3 memoirs and 1 sentence on morning television. That's the whole record, and it's all we're getting. The rest of it, the part every single one of us argues about with such total confidence, stayed behind a door that a special prosecutor, a Congress, and a quarter century of people like me never managed to open.